The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
In April of 2011, dozens of tornadoes struck in Mississippi and Alabama, with the most deadly in Tuscaloosa. In What Stands in a Storm, her first book, Kim Cross tells in real time the story of that devastation using traditional methods of interview and research, but also methods never before available to journalists. She has examined the police and emergency services messages, the TV weather broadcasts and blogs, the emails, even the texts of those caught in the storm. For some, texts sent in the last moments before their deaths. I spoke with Kim Cross in the studios of Alabama Public Television in Montgomery, Alabama. Well, Kim, it's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
I get to see you once in a while now that you're coming down to Tuscaloosa to teach occasionally in the journalism department.
That's right, in the same classroom where I was a student twice.
Well, this is a real sign of progress. Not everybody gets to do that. You were a student at Alabama for a bachelor's degree and a master's degree.
Yep.
Right. Were you an Alabamian before that?
Yeah, I joke that I come from Calabama because I grew up moving back and forth between California and Alabama. So I lived in Ozark for a little while, Santa Barbara, Tuscaloosa. I think if you count up all the years I've lived in Alabama, I'm an Alabamian.
Yeah. Were you born?
Santa Barbara. But then I moved in kindergarten to Ozark and grew up on 6 catfish ponds. So
Santa Barbara and Ozark.
That's right.
Have nothing in common
Nope.
at all.
Nope.
If you got on a piece of paper and said make a list, you'd be blank.
That's right.
You'd be blank. Did you, when you finished I remember when you were a master's student in journalism, it seemed traditionally as if those students were going to go to work for newspapers, but you didn't.
No.
What route did you take?
You know, I always wanted to work for magazines, even as an undergrad, and they really encouraged newspapers in the program, and I kind of said, well, I'm going to try. And I went out to San Francisco and started my career at a magazine called Business 2.0, which covered the new economy, the dot-com boom, and later the bust, of which I became a part. So I got laid off after a couple years working for the magazine, and then was, floundering around in this San Francisco market with a whole lot of people that were laid off and not a lot of experience. And I was competing with them for jobs. So I came back for a master's degree.
Oh, and then you went up to Southern Living.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yep.
Was Southern Living thriving? It must have been, at the time, it must have been thriving.
Oh, it was huge.
Yeah.
It was.
Right.
The travel staff, I joined the travel staff as travel editor, and I want to say there were eight or possibly even 10 if you counted the executive editors on the staff. It was huge, and that's just travel.
Right. One of the things you did for Southern Living, which it has come back to reward you in the preface to your book, is that you were the editor for Rick Bragg's Back Page essay.
Right.
Right. How did that come about?
So it actually came about when we were working on the Mockingbird story. On the 50th anniversary of To Kill a Mockingbird, I recruited actually one of my mentors, Mike Wilson from the St. Pete Times. I had been his intern, and he came to do a story for us, and someone said, you should call Rick and get a quote. And I had, done the thing that a lot of young writers do and made the pilgrimage to see the famous writer at some point, years before. And so I called him up and I said, I don't think you probably remember me, but I came to see you when you lived in New Orleans. I think I brought you boudin from a gas station. And he said, I remember you. And so I got the quote, and then I kind of minced around saying, do you think you would ever write for us? And he said, absolutely. And so I can't remember if it was his idea or his agent's or mine, but we came up with the idea of him writing a column. And at the time, Southern Journal was the longest running column in the magazine. I think it still is. And it had been written by a number of different writers. And so the editor made the decision, let's give it to Rick. And since then, people say that they read that page first.
They read it first. I've also heard that the subscription list has spiked
because people want Rick's back page column.
I've
that-
heard that. I don't know if it's
Right.
true, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. A lot of people love that page. I do too. It's a great, and I like it too because it adds something to his body of work that is new and different, and I think complementary to his books and his articles.
Yeah, I think so too. I'll tell you something that you would not normally know. I'm in contact with any number of Alabama writers and Southern writers because of the show and other things. And several of them have remarked that giving that back page to Rick deprived them of the opportunity once in a while to write the back page essay
Right.
for Southern Living.
This is true.
And they think, Rick's got the whole thing. He's got it all the time.
I know.
What?
But
There you have it. You're editing and writing as a travel writer editor. You are an outdoors person.
I guess you could say that.
You're amazingly athletic. Your interests are bicycling and hiking and running and
Yeah.
all that. Is that what you write about?
Well, I write about a lot of cycling things now because it's so natural, and it didn't occur to me for many years to ever write about something that I knew a lot about, and that it could be fun. So I do a lot of writing for Bicycling and Bike Magazine, and I started writing for Outside, and I love that. And it was also kind of a nice foil to the really heavy story that I worked on for the book. So
Well, yeah. But I was looking at your bibliography. I mean, you've published pieces in half a dozen different places.
Yep.
A lot of it to do with the outdoors.
Yeah.
The tornado came, is it now 2 years in a few days?
4 years.
I'm sorry, 4 years.
Yeah, 4-year anniversary.
And at what point did you see it as your story, see it as your book?
Not right away. It really came out of a feature story that I wrote with Rick for Southern Living. We were, in our offices that day, and we were sent home, and I remember sitting on my couch watching James Spann on the weather and the big tornado on live stream coming towards Tuscaloosa and coming through Tuscaloosa, where I'd gone to school. And when we got back to the office, Lindsay Bierman, the editor, said, we need to cover this. And it wasn't a typical Southern Living story, because Southern Living doesn't do the news. And so we had to really think, what can we say that's still going to matter in 4 months from now when the magazine comes out?
Right.
And what are people going to want to read? And so we found themes that I thought were appropriate to anyone or any disaster, whether it was 9/11 or a tornado or a flood, and it was faith, food, and fellowship. And those kind of reflected how people cope with the disaster. So that story ran. Rick wrote a beautiful, beautiful foreword, one of my favorite pieces that he's done for that, because he lived on the street where people died on that one end of the street. So he wrote that, and people just wrote in to tell us what it meant to them. And that stuck with me, that people wrote in and said, me too. I felt that too. I saw that in my neighbors and friends. So I think it must have been a year later. I was at the Mayborn Literary Nonfiction Conference in Grapevine, Texas, and I met my agent there, Jim Hornfisher, and he and I later were tossing around ideas for books, because I actually pitched him, as you recall, the Nun book that I worked on in college.
There will be a Nun book.
There one day. So we came up with the story of this, and I looked around and saw that, I looked for a perfect storm or an Isaac storm about tornadoes, and I couldn't really find one. So I thought, this is our story. This is our Katrina. It really needs to be told.
Right. You now know a great deal about tornadoes, and I'll bet anything that as you've gone around and on your tour talking about your book, people ask you, why do they form? How do they form? What is a tornado?
So I think
in 2 words or less, what is a tornado?
I think briefly it's a rapidly rotating column of air. But the long answer of how they form is we're still figuring that out. Science doesn't entirely know the recipe. Really? Meteorologists like to say that they know the ingredients present when they form, but they don't know the exact recipe. And much like if you're baking bread and your salt is a little off or the yeast is a little off, it won't rise, such is the case for tornadoes.
But when they form, they are your descriptions of the chaos, the damage, the power. I mean, I mean, hurricanes are pretty awful, and I'm sure there are lots of other awful things, but it turns the world into shrapnel. It turns everything into a bullet. I mean, the descriptions of millions of tiny pieces of wood and metal flying through the air. It's like a blender. I mean,
Exactly.
it's just fantastically terrible.
Right. I think there was a fact I reported in the book that said that the average thunderstorm contains more power than an atomic bomb. I mean, these things are so powerful, almost unfathomable, just hard to get your head around. And a whole outbreak of them is even harder to comprehend.
Yeah, well, they come in clusters too, don't they? I mean,
Not
whole
always.
families of them.
Well,
There
with
was
a
that
supercell,
day-
that
that
day
day.
there were supercells, which is a rotating thunderstorm, and that thunderstorm can bear a whole family of tornadoes, and it can live for hours and hours and hundreds of miles.
You say that the meteorologists don't quite understand yet everything there is to understand, but one of the ways that they mean to understand is by storm chasing. Out there in Kansas and Oklahoma.
Right.
And I was amused that you can't chase storms in the Southeast. Why?
Well, it's not that you can't, but it's a lot tougher and a lot more dangerous. So, out in Kansas, you can stand on a tuna can and see across 2 counties. It's flat, you can see the horizon, and the roads generally go in a grid so that you can, stay out of its way more or less if it stays on the same track. But in Alabama and in the South, our roads are like spaghetti all over the hills, and we have so many trees that they block the sky so you can't see the thing. And you can't count on the road going where you need it to go. And so it's very dangerous here.
The storm chaser movies, there's one, is it Jodie Foster? Who is it? Somebody.
Oh,
somebody,
no,
there's
Helen Hunt.
Helen
in
Hunt.
Twister.
has one. And one of the refrains in that movie is, "It's coming this way." And so you jump in the car, and if it's coming this way, you go that way, and so on.
Right.
But in Alabama, if you jumped in your car with all the hills around you, you might very well find yourself scooped up.
Exactly. So there are chasers who chase here, but they tend to do it for meteorological reasons. The chasers featured in my book, I have several sets of chasers. There are a couple of students who were just out kind of for a glory chase. And then there were a couple of meteorologists who were trying to capture it on film because people will react to a picture or a video of a tornado much better than they will react to a guy waving in front of a radar.
I saw the tornado on VUA approaching the stadium. They had the camera up on top of Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Yep.
And it was finally knocked off the air. And when it was knocked off the air, that's when I knew things were really grim.
Right.
Because it had hit Rosedale about the time that that station was knocked off the air. There are these myths, and they're kind of fun, but people really mean it.
Right.
People have notions about what tornadoes can and can't do. What are these falsehoods? There are 2 or 3 anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Some people believe that they follow the interstate or that they follow the mountains and that they bounce around inside a valley and won't cross a mountain. That's not true. It just so happens that a lot of our interstates follow our mountain range, and those things go in the same direction as the weather, which is northeast.
Yeah.
Generally, the weather moves northeast, so these tornadoes, I'm trying to think, it goes this way.
Almost all the weather goes northeast.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so it just so happens that they often do that, and people assume for the reasons that aren't true. People believe they won't cross rivers or enter cities. Tornadoes have occurred in all 50 states, on every continent, in every month of the year and every hour of the day. So people who think that tornadoes don't affect where they live are wrong. They just are more common in some places than others.
That is funny. I mean, the geographical stuff makes sense to me, but I don't remember ever watching in all my life a news item about a tornado that entered Chicago or Memphis or Nashville or anywhere. Oklahoma City, I mean,
Well,
have they come into big cities?
They have.
Yeah.
They have. I can't quote any, but I know just looking at April 27th, that outbreak, the 3-day outbreak, it affected 21 states from Texas to Canada.
Right. I'm just thinking about tornadoes going up and down city streets. It'd be an awful mess. Well, the one that comes through, well, more than one, but the outbreaks in Alabama, especially in Tuscaloosa, they are really a mess. A lot of people were hurt. A lot of people died.
Yeah.
You've managed to capture a lot of this. As far as I know, all of it. And one of the things that your readers notice is that your book could not have been written 20 years ago.
Right.
It's texts, tweets, social media, emails.
YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Google Earth I used as a resource. That was amazing. You know, there's a history tool in Google Earth. You can actually look at the satellite view of, you know, today, and then you can rewind and look at right after the tornado, right before the tornado, so you can really compare the tracks.
It is. You've got narrative nonfiction,
Yeah.
which is being made possible by a technology that is only a few years old.
Right.
The thing that I think people are most impressed with is the timestamp.
Yeah.
Everything that you say happened at a particular minute, you can prove it. How about dialogue?
So dialogue, whenever possible, I took dialogue from a time-stamped recorded source, whether it was a YouTube video, a private video, a Facebook post. The Facebook posts were incredible because they allowed you to get inside the head of someone at a very specific time.
Right.
And so if I said what someone was thinking, it came from a post or from an interview in which someone recollected what the person told them they were thinking. Some of the dialogue was recollected, but I'd say the majority of it was from a time-stamped source.
Yeah. So it's
verbatim.
I mean, if you said they said it, they either said it and somebody remembered it, or they wrote it down.
Exactly. None of the dialogue is made up.
No,
so,
no,
and of course, you know, recorded dialogue is going to be verbatim, while recollected is going to vary. But you know, some of the sources I interviewed were very, very consistent in exactly what was said. And if that's your daughter's last moments, I imagine you are going to remember.
That's exactly the kind of thing I wanted to ask. I mean, you can only interview the survivors and the relatives of people who perished in the storm.
Right.
They cooperated with you. A lot of people who lost children in the storm, children as in 21-year-old children, but they lost children in the storm.
Yeah.
And they were still okay to talk about it.
Yeah, that was the scariest part for me as a writer, was approaching them, and I did it kind of obliquely through a third party who could say, "Hey, this writer wants to reach out, but didn't want to startle you by coming out of nowhere." And so we had a lot of preliminary meetings where I said, no pressure. I just want to tell you what I'm doing. If you're okay with it, then we can proceed, but you can tell me your decision later. And we got to be very close, and they came to trust me with something that is precious, which is their story. And I think I tried as best as one could to really feel what they felt and understand what they went through and what they still go through every day.
Well, there are scenes out at the VA hospital especially where people have come to town looking for their children.
Yeah.
And their children can't be found, and they're told there's a second morgue out at the VA hospital, and there are scenes there of people identifying their daughter, son. And that's pretty tough going in there for a while in that book.
Yes.
The book sprawls. Well, the tornadoes sprawl all over the state of Alabama. I don't know how many there were.
62.
Oh, God.
62 in one day,
So there were towns,
just in Alabama.
There were towns besides Tuscaloosa.
Yes. Right.
That little towns that didn't get so much attention.
Right. I focused on Tuscaloosa because that's the one everyone remembered. But I also have scenes from Cordova, which is a small town that got hit almost at the exact same moment as Tuscaloosa. It also got hit twice. It got hit by the morning round, which knocked their power out and destroyed their downtown area. And people were cleaning up when the second bigger one came in the afternoon.
Oh, that's cruel.
It is. I know. It was just terrible. In a way, though, it was fortunate, because had it not hit in the morning, that downtown would have been full of people. And for the most part, it wasn't. But, so many little towns got hit and overlooked. And after the storms, the trucks would drive by on the way to Tuscaloosa, and the little towns would be like, hey, wait, we need help too. So I wanted people to understand, the plight of the small towns, where they often have a volunteer fire department. Most of our fire departments in the country are volunteer. Unlike a city, which has, greater resources, paid staffers who do this for a living. So
when I say that it was 60, I had no idea, 62 tornadoes. I'd forgotten that. But a book has to be organized. A book has got to have some structure. It can't just be everything about everybody everywhere.
Right.
And your book, as I understand it, as I took it in, you make the geographical center Beverly
Heights.
Which is right next to the Highlands.
Yep. Right next to near the hospital too.
And one house there in which there are some students who live and some of them survive and some of them don't. And it's the day. I mean, is that your organizational principle? Is that what you're thinking about doing? Well, it looks that way.
It is. I wanted people to be anchored to that, but I really thought about going back and forth between the characters on the ground and who are seeing the tornado through the eyes of people who, may not have a meteorological background, and then alternating with chapters that show the tornadoes through the eyes of experts, the meteorologists who can give you sort of this pan-out, wide-angle view of what's happening all over the state and really all over the region. So I thought about it in terms of being a director where you zoom in on the faces in the hallway and you can zoom out on the people, the meteorologists.
Well, the meteorologist, who is your hero, is James Spann.
Yeah.
And apparently I am not a devotee of the weather. I'm just not. I know people who are, but I mostly ignore it. Not only do I ignore the real weather that is literally outside, I also ignore the weatherman.
Right.
But I'm in a minority here. He is a very important person.
He's a celebrity here.
Yes, in a lot of lives.
He has his own bobblehead doll. He has his own following. He has a Twitter, feed that people retweet what he says. But people really love him and they really trust him. He's been around for a long time. He has driven the back roads. He knows where he knows the name of the chicken restaurant at the four-way stop, and he knows to call that out instead of the county road number because that's what people know. So, but yeah, there's a whole subculture of, they call themselves weather weenies, so I say this with affection.
I'm sure you do.
Right, but some of them are just fascinated with weather. Some of them have been trained in storm spotting classes where they actually help the weathermen by feeding them information called ground truth. When they see signs of tornadoes and bad weather, they can call it in and actually help the weathermen when there isn't a camera.
One of the things I took out of your book was that he is more trusted than other people because he doesn't cry wolf every day because he thinks people get overwarned or warned too often, too much hyperbole.
Right. Well, what you also might be referring to is the false alarm rate, which is the percentage of times when a tornado warning is sounded and no tornado actually occurs. It was hovering around 80% at the time of the storm, which means 8 out of 10 warnings, no tornado occurred. Right. It has now been brought down, I think, by about 50%. And but people were getting warned, and they would react, and then after a while they grew complacent and they stopped reacting.
Of course, I mean that's really human nature. That's why it's a parable.
So he's been working really hard to try to fix that.
All right. Do you agree? I mean, this is a conversation that I have in my house. I think the weather people are sensationalists, and I don't on a day-to-day basis. I think they're always talking about how if they say it's going to be 30 degrees at night, it's really only going to be 35. If they say the temperature is going to rise to 92, it only rises to 84. They're great exaggerators. But Spann's not, and I think that's what makes him the hero.
I would have to disagree.
Okay.
I think that meteorologists get a bad rap because what they're trying to do is tell you the future behavior of an incredibly complex system that is, it would be like judging your stock analyst by the same standards that, he says he thinks this is going to go up and then it doesn't go up as much. So, and then when it comes to the warnings, they have the choice of, okay, we haven't, I don't know if you know this, but the only way to confirm a tornado is for a human to lay eyes on it. You can't confirm the existence of a tornado with radar. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, so if they haven't had someone call in and say that they have seen it, they see signs of rotation. This looks very much like a tornado. They have to decide, do I warn for that? Or, and possibly it's a false alarm and it increases our false alarm rate, or do I not warn and it's a tornado and it kills people? I mean, they're doing a job where people live and die depending on how good of a day they're doing.
Well, in the end, yes, it's very important.
Right.
And I'm just a crank because I think what they're really saying is, you should watch me for the next 2 hours.
Well, if your eyes screw up a sentence, no one dies.
That's right. That's right. If a tornado is headed for your house,
Yep.
everybody knows to go to the middle of the house and hide in the bathtub.
Right.
Is that right? Is that what is that
Well,
about it?
you know, ideally you get underground, but a lot of our houses don't have a basement.
No.
So James Spann says that every time you get to the center of the house, a small room without windows, away from lowest floor. And ideally you can, if you can get under a table or a piece of furniture or a mattress, you're trying to protect your head, your body from flying debris, and then put a helmet on. Bike helmet.
Helmets, yes.
Yep.
I like that part. That
Yeah.
seems simple enough.
Right.
Put on the helmet, get in the bathtub.
Yeah.
This
Oh,
book-
and it booms with
this book-
thunder.
Oh, there are great storms all around us.
Right.
But you've been on tour with this book. You've been in 20 places promoting the book. Tomorrow you'll promote it at the Alabama Book Festival. But as with all writers, there's a next book. What is the thing you're going to do next? We only have a minute, but what is it?
I'm still thinking about it, but right now I'm really obsessed with guns and America's gun culture, and I think that it would be interesting to have a suburban mom's exploration of our gun culture, just in an attempt to educate herself so that she can educate her son. We live in Alabama. My 7-year-old son runs around playing shoot 'em up, every day.
Boys do.
And I'm just generally, I'm not against guns. I'm just sort of vaguely afraid of them because I don't know much about them. And everyone in my family has a different relationship with guns. And so I thought it would be kind of fun to do a reported first-person narrative exploration so that I can come up with an informed opinion and teach my son.
You're in the right place. I mean, the state of Alabama is the right place to write this book.
Right.
People are wearing their guns to church. They're not in the Waffle House because the Waffle House decided against it.
Oh.
But a lot of other places are allowing open carry and so on, and people are very strongly opinionated about all this.
But I have family in other parts of the country. I have one father-in-law, I have 2 fathers-in-law. One of them is a SWAT team leader for the FBI, or retired firearms instructor. Another one skeet shoots, or is a competitive shooter, I should say.
Right.
My cousins hunt. They live in a hunting preserve. They have concealed carry permits. And so I'm the only one in my family that doesn't have some relationship with a gun.
Well, I think you've got yourself a real good project there.
It's an interesting topic.
As it comes along, I'll look for it. Looking forward to it, in fact. Kim, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been great.